Hello, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Would anyone like to summarize what we have done in our previous session? In our previous session, we discussed about Python. We discussed about different types of control flow statements and operators. Now, operators we have already discussed, but let's re-summarize what we have done in the complex data types. So we have basically three types of complex data types, even though we have more, but the basic complex data types are list, tuples, and dictionaries. When do we use list? When do we use list variables? Anyone? List variables are generally used when you want to store data which is keep on updating, which keeps on changing, or any kind of dynamic data which you want to store that is getting stored in the list. And when we talk about tuples, now tuple is used when we want to save it. Tuples are used when you want to save some fixed data which is not changing with the time. That kind of data you store with the help of tuples. Then you have dictionaries where you are storing key value pairs, where you want to store some data in a key value pairs. That is what we have as complex data types. Then we discuss about some of the functions along with the data types, which is pop, remove, value. Then we discuss about control flow statement. In the control flow statement have if else, for loop, while loop. Now in this, why do we use if else? If you want to put conditions on any particular case, that's when you go with the if else or if else. Or if you want to do some looping, you want to perform some looping statements, then you go with the for loop or a while loop. The for loop goes that if you want to run a loop for a certain range, that's when you can go for a for loop. And talking about while loop, the while loop is used if you want to create a loop based on condition. That's when you go with a while loop. So that is about the looping statements. So we discussed some practice questions also by creating a calculator, and we have given some questions, practice questions. I hope everyone have tried them out.
Sahil, I was absent yesterday. I viewed the recording. Can you please share the file again with me? I'll do the practice.
Sure, no problem. Okay, I'll share you by the end of the session. And
Okay.
I've also added in the previous collab notebook also. So you can get this from the collab notebook also. So this is added over here as well. This is in this collab notebook. So I've shared that link as well. Previously
Can you
also.
share the link to this collab?
Yeah, sure. Here we go. So that is what we have done. Now today we'll be talking about functions. Now we have we have already discussed about some predefined functions or libraries like print statement, print function, input function. So these were all the predefined function or like inbuilt functions of Python. But suppose if you want to create your own custom function. Now first, what is a function? The function
Yeah.
is when you want to perform some set of commands altogether. That is what we call it as a function. Okay, if you want to perform multiple set of commands in a sequence order, if you want to perform multiple commands and repetitively, if you want to perform those set of commands repetitively, that's when you use a function. Okay. Now, if you want to create a user-defined function, that's when we go with a keyword as def. Now, def is used to define a user-defined function. Create a user-defined function. Okay. Def is the keyword which you provide, which tells this Python that I'm writing a function. Now you provide some name, suppose product. let's say print statement first. Now that is the syntax you apply to write a function, start a function. Now whatever thing you are going to write in this will be created. So print, suppose, how are you? Suppose this is the function which will ask, how are you? Hi, how are you? That is something which it is going to ask. Let's run this function. It's connecting. Okay. Now the function has been run. Function has been created. Now what we have to simply do is we have to just call this function. So print statement. Whenever you call this function, it will print the same set of function. And you can call this function n number of times. It will always be giving you a similar kind of result. So that is what we have as a user-defined function, where you want to suppose you have to write some command which you are gonna use or which you are gonna run again and again, or which you have to call, which you have to like some repetitive command which is to be applied everywhere in your code. So in that case, what you do, you tend to create a function, you tend to create a user-defined function which can allow you to reuse this commands, which can allow you to reuse the set of group of commands again and again. Okay, that is a user-defined function. Okay, let's get started. Let's discuss about other parts. Now, this is the basic function. Okay, we have, okay, let's do some additional functions by using the arguments. Let's call the same. That was the user-defined function. But suppose now you want to provide some argument in it. Now you want to print the custom function or custom values in it. Suppose I want to pass the name. Sure. Okay. Now we are now going with the argument based function. Okay. So suppose you want to print some custom message. Okay. Where it will be giving you the name also. So you define a variable as name in this brackets. And now this is a how are you? Let's say name over here and F over here. Now the function has executed. Let's use the same. The print statement. And now you provide the names of it. Whatever name you want to pass in. Sahil. Let's put this name here instead. Hi Sahil, how are you? Now if you whenever you will call this function, let's change the name to uh, Mansa. Mansa, how are you? So you can just keep on adding different names in this and the function will keep on updating the values without making any changes in the original one. Okay. So you can see that is how you are using a custom function. That is how a custom function is helpful to you to utilize it for different kind of use cases or to call a single statement again and again. That is the use of the custom function. So we discussed about the basic function, then the argument based function, and you can pass n number of arguments in this. There's no limit. You can pass a number of arguments inside this. And by default, also you can provide something. Like if you run it like this, so name, and you pass in like some default name. So if I say like hello user, if you run it like this, and then if you do not pass anything, like if I just run this one, what will give you? It will give you a user over here because user is by default set. This is how you can set a by default value in the variable. By default value has been set. Now you can just call this again and again. So if you provide an argument in it, it will use that name. It will use that particular variable. If you are not passing any argument, it will consider a user as the by default value. Because if without this default part, if you run it like this, run it, and if you run this, it will give you error because there's an argument which is missing in this particular one. So that's why if you provide it along with the default values, it will take automatically. So it will not create errors. Clear everyone up to this point? Okay. Moving forward, now we have two types of functions also. Right now we discussed about a function, but we have two types. One is the ones which we have created, which is a void functions. These are called the void functions. Similarly, we have another type of function, which is, suppose if I say product, like sum of functions, some function, let's say sum, and it is taking two variables, x and y. Now this sum function is taking two variables as x and y. Now what you're going to do? Obviously, you want to sum these values. So return x plus y. Let's run this. Now if I call this function as sum 5, 4, I'll get the print, I'll get the result as 9. So what is the difference between these two? Because anyway, both of them just printed something. Anyways, both of them, the output looks the same way only. Then what is the difference between both of them? The difference is if you want to store this result, in both the cases, if you want to store the result given by the output, result given by the function, that is where it is differ. So if I save this result as, suppose z is equal to this and y is equal to this, if I rerun this, so it get printed, and in this case, it will not get printed. Reason being, this is a print statement you have used, and here it is a return statement. So if you print these particular variables, suppose if I print this I'll get the output. But in this case, if I print z, I will not get the output. The reason being, it's a print statement. So it is not giving something back. Whereas in the case of this sum statement or in the sum function, we have used a return, which means whatever kind of result it is giving you back as a value. And in this case, it is just a output value to be shown. So that is the difference between a void function and a non-void function. Are we clear? What is the difference between void and non-void function or returnable or non-returnable function?
No, Sahil, can you be more clear on this return function? This print
Sure.
statement I understood. Just this is a print, whatever we are returning, it's just printing on the window. And once we close the window, it won't be stored anywhere. But what about this return?
Okay. in the case of return, what is happening that the time you run this command or the when time you call this function, the difference is it is giving you result back. Like in the case of print statement, it is just showing you output. The way we have a regular print function, that it just shows you the output. Okay. Similarly, in the case of return, it is giving you a value. It is giving you a variable or a value to be stored in something, to be stored as a value itself. Like the way we assign a variables, in front of variables, we keep a value so that that value can be stored in that variable. So similar to that, we are doing in the case of return, that for this sum function, you're going to get a return as 9. So uh, this statement, so this statement looks something like this: I is equal to 9. So this is how you are able to store the value of function in a variable.
Uh, which means we are storing the return function's value into the variable called I.
Yes.
But how it's going to be used?
So
So
for
that,
like that is,
yeah,
so we have discussed, no?
directly we
Mhm.
can use store the values in the variable itself, no?
Yeah, so right now we are doing a very simple function. Suppose you want to do some sort of we will be doing some practice questions also. But suppose you have some multiple lines of code.
Okay.
Okay, multiple lines of operation you are applying on a data. Okay, like suppose you have a data in which you want to clean it first, whatever operation you are applying to clean it, then cleaning the outlier, then cleaning for duplicates, then cleaning for skewness, and then after performing all of this, you want to store your result in a new variable so that you can compare it with the original data.
Okay.
Okay, so that is where this return value is helping you
Okay.
to perform multiple set of commands and then store this value as a variable, just not something to just show it. Because in the case of regular print statement, it is just showing you output that, okay, after performing all this is your output, but you're
Understood.
not able to store it.
Right.
It's not storable. It's not a value. It's
Yes.
just a value. It is showing once only. That is the basic difference between these two, print function or the return function.
The return function can have any data types other than numeric.
Yeah, yeah, it can have anything. You can return anything. Like even if you pass this argument also, yeah, that will also work. So if I say hi, so like let's say sum of values x, y is equal to x plus y, that will also work.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay.
So anything return function is just to tell that whatever value you come finally, I have to store it as a variable. I have to store it as a variable so that I can pass it on. So that is the difference between a return and a print.
So this function can be shared with multiple developers in a single project. Am I right?
Definitely, definitely. That's why we are creating these functions
Okay.
so
Thank you.
that it can be reused again and again. So if you have, like, as I mentioned you, the data cleaning technique. Okay. Now data cleaning is a very common practice in which we tend to apply basic formats like, okay, that first to check out all the null values. And if there are null values, you clean it. If there are outliers, you clean it. If there are duplicates, you clean it. So now these three steps are very common. And generally, what we do is we tend to create a function which can perform that much of task for us in a single go. So we do, because that's a fixed thing, we have to perform it every time. So whatever data you're coming up with, whichever kind of scenario you're coming up with, these steps is going to be there to at least check for the values. Whether the cleaning part or the way of cleaning that might be differ, but at least the checking part is going to be the same for every model or for every data itself. So that's a fix. So you can create some kind of function which can be reused again and again. That is how you're using this kind of user-defined functions.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Sayed.
Okay. Okay. Now let's do a small short question also. Mm, let's see what kind of question we can do. Okay, let's do this one question. It will give you good practice. So what we have to do is we have to create a function which can check password validation. Now we all used to create a password which have at least 8 letters, right? Generally, these are the rules. You have to create 8 letters in it, upper character, at least one upper character, one lower character, and one character also, like one symbol also. Okay, that's we have as a regular password. Now let's use this. So okay, think of it as a function. Like everyone, let's take 2-3 minutes. Everyone, think of the logic how you're gonna create this kind of function. How we should create this kind of function. Think of a logic part first. Now you might be using the for loops, if else condition, while loop, whatever you want. You can use anything. Just think of trying to create a logic. Okay, first give me this answer that whether should we create a returnable function for this one or non-returnable function for this one. Everyone, tell me for this particular function, which kind of function you are going to create. It's a returnable or a non-returnable?
Returnable.
Returnable, why?
The output we can, I mean, we can store in a variable, say whether it is valid or invalid.
Okay. Uh, suppose, okay, let's go
Or
one
simply we
scenario
can
also.
print also whether, like the password is valid or not. I mean, non-returnable also, we can do that.
Yes, we can go for non-returnable also because you have to just like if someone entered a password, you can just simply return this back, or you can just simply show the output that it's not a valid password.
Right.
You do not have to store this particular validation. If you're trying to suggest a password, in that case, it's good to go with a returnable password, a returnable function. If you're suggesting some password with all these characters, because that would be a value. But right now, it is just showing you a validation that it's a valid password or not. So it can be as a simple print statement also, or a non-returnable function also. Because when you're applying a returnable function, because that's also we have to think of it, that when you're applying a returnable function, you are gonna store or you're gonna utilize some memory in the computer. Whereas in the case of print statement, you are not utilizing the additional memory. And that thing, when you're using any kind of, when your program is using any kind of memory, that is what we call it as a memory complexity or space complexity. That how much space complexity it has been utilizing, how much space it is utilizing in your system. Similarly, we have time complexity, that how much time it takes to execute the command. So we'll discuss about both the concepts, but the major difference between return and print one, this is also we consider while choosing which one to go, because for each and every case, you can apply both of them. But how do we choose this? That if you want to store this result, it is going to consume some memory. So you don't want to utilize until unless it is required. So in this case, we can go for non-returnable function. Okay, let's create this function. So let's create this function password validation. Now in this, we'll be providing some value as a password also. That's gonna be my argument. Now that password needs to have at least 8 letters. So let's check for that. If len, now len is a predefined function in the library itself, which is password. Len of password is greater than equal to 8, greater than equal to 8, then only we are going to move forward until or else will not move forward. Then we'll check for upper character. We need to check for upper character, right? How we can check for upper character? If how can you think of it? Let's think of the logic part. If okay, let's give it this try. Is upper. I guess that will work. Let's utilize the string operation. Suppose if I have operation variable as dot is upper, that will not work. If I pass only this much, I guess that will work. Okay, so that is the way you can check it out.
So can we take all the letters in an array and in a
Yes,
for
we
loop
can do it
we
that way
can
also. That you
and we
can
can
you
match
use
each
all
and
the
every
arrays
letter?
in a array. You can use all the letters in an array, and then you're just checking for if value in this,
Yeah,
if any value
right.
matches to this one.
Right. If any value matches the condition, then proceed. Otherwise, exit.
Exactly.
Exit.
So let's use that way also. Uh, we have is so if we need to find this variable first. Let's say letter length is it using? Okay, let's use the list comprehension method. We haven't discussed about this one, so it will be a good thing to learn about. Now we have one more method to write the if condition in a shorter way by using the for loop inside this. Now what we are doing, we are using the same argument which I was using here. Now suppose if I use char dot is upper. So I'm using char dot is upper. That will give me true or false, right? But character is upper applies on a single digit only. So for that, what I do is for now I'm running a for loop for char in password. That is what we refer to as list comprehension, where you're writing a code within the single line. I'll just mark it like this. If this is like this, that's a single line of statement we have added. So if char is upper, then only move forward. Similarly, if I use Again, char is lower for char and password if again is digit for char and password then print password is valid. Or else simply say print password is, password is invalid. Now let's see if it works or not. Let's give it a try. Let's call this password validation. If I pass a password as password is valid. So what we have simply done is we have tried out with all the particular variables that here we have run a for loop for the password for that string. We have run a for loop and we are just checking each and every letter if it is upper or not. So if any value in this is upper, we are moving forward. Then for similarly for lower, similarly for digit as well. Clear everyone? How we did this?
So this is not a loop within a loop, right? So like before
We are
going to,
running loop one by one. We are not running loop within the loop. We are using if conditions within it, but loop are separate.
okay, okay. So the first loop for,
Upper
for
one.
every character, it will check whether it is upper or not.
Yes. So wherever the character comes out to be upper, it will move forward. It will come to the next. That loop will end over there only. Okay.
Hmm.
So what happens is in this case, like let me show you this also demonstration. So that is the else. Let's say else over here. If I put else over here, and if I print hmm, digits loop running. Similarly, I go with back one more where I have digits. It's a correct lower loop, and similarly we have the same else can write for print. Now if I run this, and if I go with this, what happen? Mm, mhm.
Remove the upper one and see. Upper character,
Sorry.
remove the.
Okay, let's remove this one. Okay, so definitely it's not working correct. It's giving this only. Don't have any upper character in this case. So it is giving some error. Let's say greater than this, or it is greater than this only. This is working fine. Let's solve this. Yeah. Length check. So you can see here it failed. Let's increase the numbers. 1, 2. Here it is. One more. Now it is 8 length. Password is valid. It's not working correct. Yeah, dot per. Why it is up giving this? Yeah, definitely it's not a correct way we are going with. Let's go with this method. If upper is this. Okay, so it is failing over here. It is not properly checking this. If char is upper for char and password, use any knife added. Okay, so I have to use any part over here. That was the mistake we are doing. Let's see, let's use here to add any. Now it is correct. Let's add this. Now password is valid. Now the only point was missing is this any part. Now what is the any was doing that if there is any true in it, if there is any true value in it, then move forward only. Okay. If it is any true value in it, only then move forward. Or else just stick it over here. Suppose if I just make this all as upper characters. No, I'll get an error on the lower loop part. That lower loop is running. Or there is no lower letter available. So that is how we are checking it. We are checking your password correctness or validation. Clear, everyone? Okay. Now let's talk about some additional functions, additional pre-built functions which are available in this Python library, which is a lambda function. Now that is also a very important one. Reason being, it's been utilized a lot. Let's talk about lambda function. Now lambda function is an anonymous function. Okay, you can see it's been highlighted automatically. Now lambda function is called as an anonymous function. Now what do we mean by anonymous function? Function for which you do not have to define as a DEF, which will not get stored anywhere. It's a one-line function. So whenever you want to apply a simple function only, that's when we generally tend to apply this kind of function. So suppose you have a function called as suppose you have a function called as what's happening? back. So yeah, it's working. So lambda function is it's a kind of it is called as an anonymous function. Now, what is anonymous function? So it is not to be defined. You cannot recall this kind of function again and again. But if you have some kind of use, sorry. So wherever you have some kind of use and where you need to create a function, but it will not be something else to be reused again and again. So suppose if I take simple example as add or addition. Now here I can create a simple function as lambda x comma y. That lambda function, it's an anonymous function. You are not defining a proper name to it. So you're just defining there's a variable as add, which is taking two variables as x and y. Now, what kind of operation we are going to apply? X plus y in it. Okay. Now, if I just run this, and if I want to call this function again, results will be equal to add. I provide the variable as x over this, and I'll get the result. So it's like a single line function. We generally apply lambda in a single line operation only. Like here in this case, you can apply multiple set of operations, right? In a user defined function. But in the case of lambda, you apply whole of the function in a single line only. So it is generally used within the expressions. Most of the time, it was only used in inside the operations or inside the particular uh, function or inside a particular operation you are applying. Understood? That is what we have as a lambda function. So wherever you want to apply some sort of if condition, else condition, or you want to do some kind of conditional part, that's when you can apply this kind of lambda functions. Now, similar to that, we have map function also, which we call it as a map functions. Let's say, let's understand the map. So we have additional functions map, reduce, and filter. Now let's understand these functions also. Now let's talk about the map function. Now, map is also a very commonly used kind of pre-built function, which helps you map two values together. Okay, which helps you map two values together. Okay. Now, suppose if you have some values as um, like something we can give is okay. Let's use lambda and map both together. Suppose you have a list function or list variable such as numbers as 1, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, how will you use map? Is that map will help you apply operations on top of it. So if I say result is equal to, again, I want to store it as a list operation. Okay, I want to store this result as a list value. Now I am applying a map function, and within that map, because it is gonna map two values together and give you a single value. So obviously, you want to suppose you want to get squares of all the numbers in the list. Okay, you want to get squares of all the numbers in the list. Now, how will you do it? One way is that you can simply write a for loop for I n number and you use a list variable. Suppose variable as v is equal to empty list, and then you are writing as v dot append I times I. Now, if you run this much code, print v. If you run this, let's move this part, you get the squares of all the numbers in the list. Okay, that is one way of doing it. Let's see the another way using the map function. Now these are something called as a this is some techniques which we follow for the improvisation of the coding techniques. Now here what we are doing is we are calling the lambda function, which is taking one argument, comma, sorry, comma not, which is taking one argument, and the use of that is to square the values. Now, what thing are we mapping with it? We are mapping the number, this number list itself. So what will happen? It will automatically run a loop, and one by one, it will do that part of running. Now, if I just simply print this result and run it, you can see you're getting the same result over here also. By writing the whole length of code, which we have done over here, you're getting all of it in a single line. That is when we use this kind of map function, or the similarly as reduce function also. So that was a map function, which we had now discussed. Now let's take example of a reduce also. Now suppose if you go with values as result. Now let's say calculate the sum of all the numbers. Like for the same list, you want to calculate the sum of all the numbers. Now that is where you can use a reduce function. Now how will you do the reduce? Reduce, again you can go with lambda, which is taking two variables, x and y. And now you're doing the x plus y. And you're mapping it with number. Now what it will give you result? It will just simply give you the sum of all the numbers in this. We got some error. Okay, reduce is to be called. Let's discuss that also. So you got 50. Now, what was this line which I added? Now, this is what we call it as a inbuilt library. Now, Python have its own inbuilt libraries to perform some basic tasks. Like maths library, it already have to apply any kind of mathematical operation if you want. Similarly, we have the function tools, which have like we have used map, filter, list. Now, these are some inbuilt function which are very commonly to use. But to use some advanced functions which is already available within the Python, that's when you call this function tools library, which provides you with another good length of functions available inside the Python. Now, reduce is one of the function which you're getting, which you're saying that from this function tool library, give me this function reduce. And this is how you call the libraries. This is how you call the inbuilt libraries available in the Python. Clear, everyone? Is it clear? Any question, query, doubts to this part? If anyone have?
So function tool is a library.
Sorry.
So the function tool is the library.
Yes, function tool is a library.
Oh.
function tool is a library similar to other libraries, like the ones which we are going to do afterwards also. In the case of Sparks, like if you want to call the Sparks library, again, you need to install it first. But again, to call that kind of library, you go with the import PySparks. So that's how we call this PySpark library or the Sparks part, which we are talking about earlier in our previous session only. The very first session we discussed about Sparks and PySparks. So that's how we call that library as well. So we'll discuss about that also. So that is all about the Python part, which we are going to discuss, which we are going to study from next session onwards. We'll start with SQL language, where we'll discuss about SQL, how SQL is working and everything about the SQL part only from next session onward. And after that, after completing the SQL part, that's when we'll start with the proper data engineering part. So any question, query, doubts to this Python part regarding any of the topic in Python?
So Python is completed today?
Yes, Python is completed today.
Sahil, please start the session at exactly 7 o'clock, not before that. We are missing some 5-10 minutes.
No, we have started at 5. No, we have started only at 7. Even 7:02 we have started.
Okay. There's a message in the group mentioned that it's started at 6:50.
Oh, it was like the session will start, but will not be start to study, like to own that session so that others can join. That's why it's 6:55. That we are just opening the session for before 5 minutes, but we start teaching after 7 only. That is how it was like 6:55. So everyone will join within that 5 minutes, 6:55 to 7, and at 7 we can exactly start with the session. That is what that means only. We started the session after 7 only. Okay, clear everyone? Any question, query, doubts regarding any of the topic? Okay, then that's all for today. That's all for today. Thank you, everyone. And for assignment part, let me give you some short questions also instead of assignments. Question for functions. These are some practice Python questions which you can go with. There's some practice questions which you can go with uh, to practice this functions topic. So it's available in the same Collab notebook. Yeah, so you can practice some functions over here using these questions itself. So that's all for today. Thank you, everyone. If you have any question, query, doubts, please let me know. Okay. Then that's all for today. Thank you. Have a good day ahead.